Hey everyone, it is Ayana, your transformation health coach. Forgive me, I'm trying to make sure that everything's good. You can see I got toys in the background. Look, there's always a kid thing in the background with this. So I'm trying to just move things around so that I can see what is happening. There's a new Facebook um, format for going live, so I'm just making sure that I am set up correctly. Okay, good. Hi everyone. Happy Sunday to you all. And as you can see from the tone of this video, that this is going to be about why self care is so important and why it's so revolutionary, and why, if you're not doing it, you need to. And this is really inspired by, kind of the events that have been going on recently with George Floyd and and I can't remember if that woman's name is Amanda Cooper, and just, the way in which our country is dealing with or not dealing with racism right now. And it's just kind of been, it really has affected me in a deep way, and I wanted to talk about it. But as usual, because I am really all about, because I'm a transformation health coach, and what I value and care about deeply is helping people transform and change their mindsets so that they can, stay motivated to stick with healthy habits for life and take good care of themselves and feel energized and amazing. It's really important for me, to think of this in a way that has healing, in a way that is hopeful. And so I wanted to share this video because, number one, it's going to be cathartic for me. You guys are all giving me a lot of these videos are therapy for me, so thank you. But also too, it's, I hope that that the message is therapeutic for people out there as well too, and also gives you some hope about things that you can do and just some thoughts that I was having. So I wanted us to talk about, self-care and why it's revolutionary, and talk about the riots, and the protests, and the death of George Floyd, and all of that stuff in this video. So forgive me if there's some moments. I have some notes, but because it's such an emotional topic, I may have some ramblings. So if I start to ramble, please, you can just text in the comments, you're rambling, and I will self correct. So I hope that you guys are all safe and doing well, and as happy as possible. Now, when we talk about self care, it's important to prioritize what that is, because it's a big buzzword, but so often we don't really, sometimes we might have a different understanding of what that is. For me, self care is about time for you, time for self, you investing in you, you prioritizing you, you prioritizing, doing things that you love, that make you happy, doing things that make you healthy, so eating well and exercising for sure, self care, right? Um, Also, it is stress management. It is taking care of yourself. It is, making sure that you're doing activities you love every day, even though you're busy. Okay. And again, it's about knowing and understanding that you are a priority and you deserve it. And it really is revolutionary for not only you and for your own life, but for your soul and your community. When we take care of ourselves, it has a ripple effect for everyone around us. And I can testify to that, right? So many of us can when we finally do it. But it's interesting to me how many of us struggle with it. I deeply struggled with this for a long time, so I get it. Now, we're in a world that throws a lot at us sometimes. And on a personal level, I mean, we've been dealing with corona, right? I mean, that is the backdrop for all of this, right? The backdrop for all of this is that we're in a pandemic, even though for a few days I forgot that. People are losing work and losing income left and right. I've been having challenges in my own business, clients who wanted to work with me but then just couldn't financially afford it. Having a contract cut in half by a school, just all types of things. People are dealing with loss. People are, you know, um, dealing with so much. On my own plate, I've been dealing with lack of childcare, and that's a little crazy making, right? So in all of this scope and energy, we're in a pandemic. People have been, for the most part, trying to shelter in place or do what they can. And then all of these things seem to be happening, and it just feels like, who lit the match? Okay. Now, it's important to take care of you because it helps you, and like I said before, it helps everyone else around you and our world. When we show up better in our skin, we show up better everywhere else. When I don't take care of myself, when I don't pour back into my cup, it shows up in all of my interactions. I'm not as great of a mother. I'm less patient with my husband. I'm less patient with myself. I can be very unkind to myself in those moments where I'm not taking good care of ourselves. And so many of us can relate to that. And so part of the reason that I want to have this conversation in relation to everything that's going on is because despite everything that's, going on in the world right now, I don't know if you guys heard this, but I think they said that suicide calls or suicide hotline calls are up 1,000%. So everyone is going through it. And then, bam, death of George Floyd um, on videotape, all of the issues that have come with that, protests, rioting. It's enough to frankly drive anyone crazy. So it's really important that we are taking care of ourselves in this time. And just, my feelings about watching that. I think like most of us, it it was a mixture of things for me. It was shock, horror, um, the feeling of again, you know, how many times is this going to happen type thing. Um, and also too, knowing that the initial police report when he passed away was completely different than what we saw in the video. And also knowing that that happens so often. It's a common thing in our society for this type of scenario to go down. And I've actually witnessed things like that in my life. And so, I really, for me, there is it's I'm still processing everything because there's a lot of emotion going on. As you can see, I'm kind of processing it, and a lot of us still are. A lot of us, I'm sure, are also processing the riots. And I want to talk a little bit about rioting and protests in a minute. But one of the things that is very, very important as a coach, and just for those of us who want to grow and change and be our best selves, the first things we have to do is tell the truth. Truth is so hugely important. Honesty, showing up authentically. And a lot of the conversations, I've been hearing a lot of people talk about this in a way that is truthful to their own experiences, and that's powerful. But I'm not hearing, there are some people who are really only focused on the rioting and the protests and losing the truth of this moment. And the truth is that people are crying out and people are just saying and describing pain and trauma and a legacy of this, a legacy of oppression, a legacy of injustice, a legacy of feeling like second class, third class, fourth class citizens. And I know one of the things that, like I've also been a teacher for many years. And one of the things that always struck me about our education system in this country is that there's not as much truth telling as there needs to be. you know Truth is extremely important. And when I'm a coach and supporting clients, I help my clients acknowledge the truth within themselves so they can make change. And for my own self in my own life, so I can make change, I also have to confront myself. I make mistakes on a daily basis and I have to acknowledge them so that I can grow and be better and have the best quality of life. And the same thing for our country. Our country is in this place where we really have to listen to and be truthful. And if we're unable to listen to an entire group of people's truth, where every or the majority of Black people are saying this is real, this happens, and I feel traumatized. I've watched my parents, my grandparents, my family members deal with this. We have to stop and listen to that. And so when we can tell the truth, and I pray that, it's very sad that George Floyd and so many others have lost their lives in this way. But I pray that a lot of the emotion that I'm seeing coming out will spark people, white people, in particular, because white people are in control or have a lot more control over this racism narrative than people of color do. But I really hope that what it sparks is this revolution of like, wait a minute, we we are flawed human beings just like everyone else is. We are imperfect. but we all should learn. We should all invest in learning. And I hope what that does is that it invests in schools to where there's ethnic studies at a younger age. San Francisco uh, made it mandatory where every student has to take ethnic studies in high school, and that's wonderful. I wish, that ethnic studies was something that was required throughout because, there were many things about my history that I did not learn until I went to college and went into an ethnic studies or black studies class that was just like that blew my mind, and I'm like, wait, that happened? If everybody knew this, do you know what that would like, how much that would change, how much that would change our interactions in this country? And so it's the same thing for communities of color and marginalized communities across the board. I think the more that we know about our history, the more we have context for what is going on today. And I think the more open folks would be to having conversations about these things without feeling defensive, without it being shut down. And the other thing, and it's an important thing, truth telling has been going on for a while from the people of color's side, but hearing the truth sometimes, especially when you feel at blame, is a hard thing. In my relationship with my husband, when he is like, you know what, you made a mistake, sometimes it's very hard for me to hear. I'll admit that. Okay. I don't like, even though, yes, I'm a coach and personal growth and all that, I'm a human and I don't like to hear that I'm wrong sometimes. Or I don't like to, it's a difficult thing. But truth receiving is going to be critical for all of this and for healing. And with that, I had some thoughts about the protests and rioting. People who know me personally know that I've been a community activist and organizer for my whole life. I've been to more protests than I can count on my fingers and toes. And, I believe in, First Amendment right. I believe in people expressing their dismay. And I just want to say something about the rioting aspect of it. It's really, really important, as I said before, that we recognize in this moment that as a coach, again, somebody who cares deeply about personal growth, I care about truth and I care about how people feel because these are the things that motivate people. And I really actually, in addition to ethnic studies, I think all of us should take everyone should have to take like a psychology course too, because there's so much that we learn about human beings and how we function. But the important thing to understand, so no matter what your opinions are on the writing, whether or not you were like, I get it, or I don't get it, and it's corrupting or it's corrupting what they're trying to say, it's corrupting the message. I want to speak to that person, to those of us who feel that way, because I understand that. I understand where that's coming from. But here's the important thing you have to understand. This rioting is not about logic. It's not about logic. So when we put this logical kind of framework on rioting and we're like, what's their aim? Is it effective? I mean, and also too, we can discuss whether or not it's really effective because, that first officer got charged pretty quickly thereafter. So we can really debate the efficacy of it, but it's not about logic. It's about pain. It's about pain. Okay, so we have to hear it differently. We have to understand that. It's an act of pain from people who have felt perpetually and have been perpetually traumatized and victimized by a system and by a society and have watched it play out for decades and centuries. Okay, like, in 1619, you know, it, Black people have been enslaved since the 1600s. I mean, it's crazy, right? This is a pattern, an ongoing pattern of feeling traumatized, victimized, dehumanized. It's not just this one incident or the incidents that have come up in the past couple of years or even the past 10, 20, 30 years. It is it's the collection of watching your ancestors, like generation after generation, witnessing and watching dehumanizing, traumatizing behavior and passing that down. And it just changes slightly, but just watching that. So that is the culmination of things. That is where a lot of this is coming from. And now we can have an argument about the effectiveness of writing, because again, as I mentioned before, they charged that officer pretty quickly. And again, I don't for me personally, it's not the way that I protest. It's not the way that I that I protest, but I understand it. I understand it. It's an act of the deepest pain. And so this comes from also too. So we can talk about historical trauma, but also very important. And again, as coach, I care about people's mindset. But this comes from the trauma of being in poverty, living in uncertainty, being treated as subhuman for a lifetime, and watching others get killed, stepped on, and in a lot of cases where it's when there are no cameras rolling, there are a lot of times where these things go unnoticed, or where people are don't believe it. And rage and anger is really just hurt. It's really just pain. In your own life, in my own life, whenever we're feeling anger or rage, what's really going on under the surface of that is just more pain. Okay. So I know, and the other thing too, I was a teacher for many years and I taught some of the most traumatized youth you can imagine. Okay. Talking about youth who had been, exposed to like a lot of, like had been, whose communities had been like ravaged by crack and it's just, and I'm from East Oakland where that's been the narrative, where that's been what happened, where that's been the history of it. And it is so much of what's going on is a lot of people reacting through trauma, the trauma of like having gone through a lifetime of dealing with more than anyone can imagine. So, like witnessing violence, watching other people get incarcerated. And this is about chronically feeling dehumanized and saying to hell with it. To hell with it. This system, this society doesn't care about me. Why should I care about it? And so the response needs, of course, I think I understand why you have to shut it down. I get that. And I think what's important though is that things happen in a very humanizing way, as humanizing a way as possible. And I actually appreciate the way that some police, officers and precincts have been trying to handle it. I think there's been a couple, we've seen some examples of like not handling it the best way, and I get it too from a police officer standpoint. I wouldn't want that job. I mean, that's a highly, highly stressful job, and my hats off to people who want to be doing the right thing in that role. But also it's just like we have to have an empathetic response in our society. Yes, we can stop the rioting and what's going on and the property destruction and all of that, but we cannot condemn or turn our backs on people. Okay, people are deeply hurt. I don't care if you saw people waving middle fingers in the camera. People are deeply hurt, and all of us, every human being at their core, need to feel understood and validated. It's just that simple. Okay. And I would invite, like I actually posted this on my profile page, but I'm going to pull it up for you. A lot of people have been bringing this quote up, but I love it. It's that MLK quote that, when he says that a riot is a language of the unheard. And I got to tell you, I've been in so many protests and rallies and things that were peaceful to throughout my life for to fight against injustice and fight against oppression. And sometimes it feels hopeless. Sometimes it feels like no one is listening. Sometimes it feels like you're just alone. And that if you don't look a certain way, if you're not white, or if you don't have power or influence, that you're not heard. And so this is like the language of the unheard, the language of the desperate. And I can understand that. And finally, I would also invite you to, this, I'm going to pull it up on my phone. Where is it? So Thomas More, Sir Thomas More, who believe, okay, all the history buffs out there, please correct me, but is he a philosopher from like the 1700s? I forgot exactly what he did, but he wrote that book Utopia. And if you haven't heard this quote before, you need to hear this because it's very powerful. He said, this is back in the 1700s, right? And he's speaking of, and this is very important because he's not speaking about Black people. He's not speaking about people of color. Sometimes in this country it gets very racialized, and we can start to view the aggressive behaviors as though it's just people of color doing it. This is a human thing that happens when people feel chronically unheard and dehumanized. He said, if you suffer your people to be ill educated and their manners to be corrupted from their infancy, and then punish them for those crimes to which their first education disposed them, what else is to be concluded from this, but that you first make thieves and then punish them? And that's really, the question. That's really what we have to sit with in this country. I'm a coach. I'm about healing and truth telling. And how much of this has our society set up for us? How much of this, like we're in a system, unfortunately, that does not do a good job with mental health care, healthcare in general. As a health coach, I see it all the time. People are like, well, I'd love to work with you. Will my insurance work with you? And I'm like, sadly, no. And it's because so much of this is we're not really set up in a system that is people centric. There's a lot of times where it feels like it's profit over people, where it's about the bottom line, and so many people fall through the cracks, and it breaks my heart. And when we do that, when we create that type of, we kind of ask for what, it's, or I don't want to say we ask for, but it's an inevitable conclusion that this type of anger and rage would come up. And especially as it relates to police brutality and racism in this country. And I think if we could just if we could just receive the truth, you know, in a real way, I think a lot of this, we could solve a lot of these issues. I believe in that. So the other thing I was going to say too is that, I really do feel the pain. Like I get it, and I have had, and, me personally, I've had really good run-ins with police officers that were really wonderful and affirming and validating, and where I got humanized. And I've also had run-ins with police officers that were awful, where I felt it in my soul, and I was like, "What just happened?" Like where I felt really dehumanized, for lack of a better word. And so I get it. And so the other thing too is that I just want this also said too. I'm probably a coach and I was probably a teacher because I'm an incurable optimist. I really do believe in the goodness of all human beings. And yes, that includes, the people who are out there writing, and that also includes police officers. You know, I believe that when people know better and have been instructed, they do better. Because why do I believe that? Because I went through that in my own life. Like we all go through growth and evolution on a personal level. So I believe that about anyone, but unfortunately, I believe that most people, that everyone in our society, unfortunately, that we've all been taught and brought up to believe certain lies about people of color. Like there's not enough representation of people of color in the history books, and as a teacher, it saddens me to say this, but that's just kind of, you know, if you don't know this, then you should check. Then you should really invest in learning more about, like ethnic studies courses or Black studies, Latino, Chicano studies, things like that, other marginalized groups too. Because we've all been brought up not to hear full truths, it creates this situation where we otherize each other, where it happens a lot, where when you're speaking racially specifically, where it's easy for white people to otherize people of color. Because if you're not represented in the history books, and if you've been brought up feeling like, well, you know, America is the good guys, we're always on the right side of things, then it's very easy to have that narrative. It's very easy to kind of swallow that idea. And so I think that is what leads to a lot of issues. I had a student in one of my classes. I was teaching in, schools that were, mostly kids of color. And I had one white student in my class, and I actually posted a blog about this. I'll put the link for that in the comments. But I had this white student in my class who I loved. And it was fascinating because we were talking about, there were a lot of police shootings happening at that time too, sadly. And we were talking about it. And he was very adamant. Well, he's like, well, Black people just commit more crime. And I was like, and I was like, okay, and again, and all of the kids of, he's like, I just believe that like Black people and Latino people commit more crime. And I was like, okay, so that stunned me a little bit, but I was like, this is good honesty. Let's have a conversation. We were able to unpack it. It turned out there were some basic things about Black and Latino people in this country and how unfortunately we've been mistreated that he didn't know. And when he learned about the mistreatment, and then he also learned that, wait a minute, that's not like, he's only been in San Francisco. So he had a very limited window of experience. He didn't know about the local history of what had gone on there, that had led to it looking or appearing that way, or for if crime numbers were elevated, here's why. He didn't have all of that context of like, okay, poverty number one across the board is the number one cause of committing crime. Doesn't matter what color you are. Okay, that's why Sir Thomas More was making that comment back in the day in the 1700s. But so this is the point of that. Like when there's certain basic things that you're just like, oh, okay, well, yeah, okay. If poverty is really the thing that causes crime to be elevated, and if people of color are dealing with more poverty at an unequal rate, then maybe this makes then like okay, maybe it makes some sense why I'm seeing this in my community. And then when I told him, I'm like, also too, do you know that there are a lot of black neighborhoods in this country that are not crime ridden, or and he was shocked by that. So I think we have to fight back that. I'm starting to ramble, but you guys get the point, right? We have to fight back against it. We have to tell that truth. And so, and when I saw he started to shift, and I really loved that conversation because it wasn't like my response. I was able, and again, not every person of color needs to be called on to do this. I've done a lot of healing work on myself. There was a point, if this had happened like maybe 15 years ago, it would have been a way harder conversation for me. But because I've done a lot of healing work on myself, I was in a much better position to be able to have it. But I do believe in people's capacity for change. But what has to happen is that people have to be willing to be aware and open and willing to listen. You have to have openness to change, openness to the fact that you might be wrong about some things, openness to hearing other people. Okay. And so this is why now, bringing this all back full circle now, it's like, this is why like self-care is so revolutionary and important, because had I had this conversation with him back in that, like, a lot of people have heard me talk about this before. In my teaching days, I was not great with self-care. I was a community organizer, a caregiver for my mom. I was in grad school and I was teaching beyond full time at a school where I was dealing with a lot of students who were highly dealing with a lot of trauma. And it was emotionally taxing and it was overwhelming. And I did not know how to take self care. I also didn't feel like I deserved it, as so many of us don't. And this is part of the reason when I was able to take care of myself, I was able to be in a more forgiving place, and it allowed me to have this conversation um, with this white student in my class, by the way. And it was helpful in a way that I didn't realize. But it also, what it did too is, just recognizing too that we live in a society that is not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. No place is. And if we are going to just survive on a personal level, from a mental health standpoint, if we want to be able to thrive and have the kind of lives that we all deserve to live, we have to pour back into our cups, especially when things like this happen. Especially because I'm going to tell you this, taking care of yourself is an act of self love. It is a revolutionary act of self love. It is a gift to everyone that you care about and everything that you care about, the causes you care about, the communities you care about, the people in your neighborhood, their family, everyone that you want to be available and present and amazing for. Self love is necessary for all of that. And I just want to say that as a Black woman, I've definitely I was definitely conditioned to not take care of myself, just handle business and, just kind of keep it moving. And so many of us are taught that to be strong, we have to soldier through. And that's not just a Black thing about soldiering through. That's kind of an American thing, maybe a Western thing. But, I have had so much more freedom from being able to take care of myself. And it's helped shape everything that I do and everything that I touch in a different way. I'm able to show up and help people and help clients and groups that I support and organizations and teachers because I work on myself. And I want to encourage you, especially in this moment, especially in this highly traumatic time that we're in, to please invest in yourself in some way. Whether that's, coaching, whether that's therapy, whether that's, talking to your friends and family about how you're actually feeling about it, whether that's allowing yourself space to break down and cry. Like I cried the other day on a walk thinking about all this. And then, giving yourself permission to do things that are joyful and that bring you back so that you can be okay. But also too, another reason why self-care is revolutionary is because for me, and as a Black woman, my ancestry is so important to me because I don't know half of my ancestry or a lot of it because slavery interfered in my ancestry. And, the system in this country of not, it, it interfered. And there's a big side of me that I don't know. But what I do know, and we all have our own personal stories, our own personal ancestries. But what I do carry with me very proudly, and I wear it like a crown, is that people before me fought and died for me to live a better life and to be happy and to feel free and to not feel and to not, you know, be feeling, I don't even know the word I'm looking for, I'm getting emotional, but just so that I could have this sense of freedom. And now, while I personally might not have control over everything that's going on around me in this world, I have control. I think as a community organizer and as people who are fighting on the front lines in that way, who want to make large scale action in their communities on a countrywide level, yeah, you can take that. You can take those steps. That is a slow and steady, progressive marathon work that you can control. But that has, like, again, you have to, some of that you can't always control, right? It's like that's a longer process of movement, right? That we should fight in and should be a part of, but it takes time. But we also deeply have control of is ourselves, is our mental health to a certain degree, is our self care, is how much we believe in and love ourselves, in how we treat ourselves. And every time that I exercise, when I eat well, I'm eating well, not just for myself, but I think about my mom. I think about my kids. I think about my community. I think about, Black people and Black women who are in a more difficult situation than I'm in. I think about all of those people and I'm grateful for where I can be and where I'm at. I do it for my ancestry, again, who fought for me to be in a better place, who did not have the control over their self-care that I have today. And I choose to be at my best self to honor them. I choose to be at my best self to honor them. And so I hope that all of you, I know we got a little deep. And that's part of the reason why actually, I actually have my daughters doing all types of self-love activities. We do affirmations every day. I'm always talking to them about, like, they don't have to be perfect. Just try your best, try your hardest. And I will also link to the affirmations I use with them. They're very powerful. Helping my daughters be self-forgiving, helping my daughters be like, recognize how beautiful and powerful, how intelligent they are, how they deserve patience, how they deserve respect, how they deserve self-care, how they deserve a break, that they don't need to be perfect, that they don't need to look a certain way to get approval. And so many of us can relate to that. But it starts with you. It really does start with you. And so, all of this is a long-winded way of saying that, I invite all of you guys to do something good for yourself, to take care of you, because again, people invested in you. People wanted you to be better than them, even if you don't feel like you came from a community that suffered that much. And that's okay. But people before you invested in you so that you could have a better life. They worked hard so that you could be here. And so, whatever that right now, during this summer feels like a bizarre segue, but I like, that's part of the reason why I do the coaching work that I do now, because I really care deeply about people changing their mindset so that they can have a better life. Change your mindset so you can change your habits and have the life you want to live. Because that's what happened for me. When I worked on my mindset, when I invested in my self-care, it made so many other areas of my life fall into place. And so if you struggle with that, please message me. I'd love to have a free session with you to figure out what it is that might be stopping you from doing that, because you deserve it. And we all do. And for those of us, for people who are gone, who've passed on, for George Floyd and for other people who may not have had an option right now, you do. You honor them by taking care of yourself in a radical and revolutionary way. So again, I'd like to invite you, if you know that you need to check in with someone just one-on-one and have a conversation about it, let me know. I'd love to support you. And I have all different types of things going on. to get healthy right now, if that's your ambition, and if it's not, to just things to help you grow and evolve and work on you and process things in a way that helps your mindset and that helps you move forward. I would love to support you with that because I get help and support all the time. Okay. So with that said, I love you all. Have a great rest of the day. We will get through this. Take care. Oh, I didn't even see the comments. Okay. Thank you for all of that love. My notes were blocking it, but thank you for showing me so much love, guys. And again, message me, if you want to know more about getting healthy right now, about really that self care coming from that deeper place, then message me. I'd love to support you. All right. Bye, everyone. I don't even know how to end this. Here we go. End live video. All right. Bye, everyone.